At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. After all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Larissa. Let's begin. The percussive crack of superheated air an inch from his helmet was the only coffee Master Sergeant Darian Colt needed. He hugged the ferrocrete rubble, the reek of slagged metal and vaporized circuits a permanent part of his life's scent.
"Status, Jensen!"
He barked into his comms, his voice a rasp. "Barrier integrity is critical, Sergeant. Readings are in the red. The primary capacitor is slag. We must shunt power from the secondary, or we're a commemorative crater in about a minute." Corporal Zoe Jensen's words tumbled out of her breathless and sharp. Colt risked a glance over the broken wall. The scourge swarm, a flood of jagged black metal organisms, skittered forward on mismatched legs, an infestation, a plague of self-replicating biomechanical locusts that stripped worlds bare. The grunts called them xylocopa, carpenter bees, for the way they drilled a planet down to its core. Right now, they were drilling their way through forward operating base Dauntless.
"That kind of feedback will overwhelm the secondary."
Colt shot back, already working to pull the fried wiring from the barrier's control panel. He found the right tool by feel.
"We do it by the book, slow and steady."
"They wrote the book for fighting things that take cover. These things never stop." A volley of kinetic slugs hammered the wall above them, showering Colt's shoulders in pulverized concrete. "I can write a bypass protocol. That'll create an energy flood. It'll hold the field for maybe a few minutes, tops. Long enough for the evac birds to lift off."
"And if it blows?"
Colt kept his gaze on the panel. He stripped the wires in quick, practiced motions. "It'll overload every power system within a click. The lights, the guns, the life support in the medbay, everything." Colt paused. He pictured the medbay full of screaming Marines and the evac transports sitting dead on the tarmac. He returned to his work.
"No, we do it the slow way."
He slammed a fresh power conduit into its socket.
"Keep their heads down."
Jensen let out a frustrated sigh, but the rapid thumps of her pulse rifle answered him. The kinetic barrier flickered, then stabilized, though the indicator light remained a warning red. Incoming fire now spattered against a wavering amber curtain of light instead of the wall itself. Colt leaned back, taking his first real breath in minutes. It tasted like ash.
"See? The book works."
"For now," Jensen muttered. His radio crackled. "Colt, this is command. Assault's broken. The Scourge are pulling back."
"Acknowledged, Command,"
Colt said, already scanning the battlefield, seeking the next point of failure. "Good work, Master Sergeant. Now clean up. You and the Corporal have a formal reception to attend on the observation deck. Diplomatic welcome wagon. ETA 30 minutes. Colt stared at the smoking husks of Scourge drones littered across the field. He looked at his hands covered in grease and grime. He thought about putting on his dress uniform, about smiling and shaking hands while the casualties were still being tallied and bagged.
"Acknowledged,"
he said, his voice flat, every word an effort. The observation deck on Fob Dauntless was another world from the mud and blood outside. The air was scrubbed clean, with a faint sterile scent from the scrubbers. Diffused light filled the space, and the deck plating hummed with the quiet, confident power of a Terran Coalition capital ship. Colt stood stiffly, out of place among the polished chrome and pressed uniforms. His dress uniform was clean, but it felt stiff and wrong. He had scrubbed his skin raw, but the phantom scent of battle clung to him. He stood beside Jensen, who bounced on the balls of her feet. She'd managed to get most of the marker smudges off her face. "Can you believe it? The Cygnian Ascendancy. Their last formal contact with a new species was 5 millennia ago." She whispered, her eyes wide with fascination. "Their energy manipulation tech is purely theoretical to us. It's like meeting Newton or Einstein."
"They're aliens, Jensen. Just aliens."
Colt grunted, keeping his gaze forward.
"And they're several millennia late to this party."
A chime echoed through the deck, and the assembled officers fell silent. The main hatch cycled open with a faint hiss, revealing a delegation of figures. A subtle personal energy field that warped the light surrounded their slender frames. They were Cygnians, tall, slender figures with fine, soft plumage that covered their bodies in shimmering patterns of opalescence. Their leader stepped forward, his plumage a flow of liquid silver and gold. High Emissary Lyran.
We greet the valiant Terran Coalition in this time of shared trial.
Lyran began, his voice melodic, each word resonating with perfect modulation. He spoke of cosmic harmony, the sanctity of existence, and the noble art of defense. He spoke for 15 minutes. Colt's focus blurred. He counted the rivets in the ceiling. A guard bringing a new object forward interrupted his mental catalog of remaining munitions. It was a rifle, but calling it a rifle was like calling a star a campfire. Crafted from a material like polished bone, with channels of steady, inset blue light in its frame. It possessed the delicate artistry of a ceremonial blade.
To cement our burgeoning alliance,
Lyran announced, his feathers puffing out slightly.
The Signian Ascendancy gifts you the pinnacle of our defensive artistry, the Phase Lance. May it sing a song of defiance against the encroaching silence.
General Morozov, the base commander, stepped forward and accepted the weapon with a politician's smile.
On behalf of the Terran Coalition, we accept this honor, High Emissary. This is a generous gift.
Colt had to suppress a snort. A gift. They were 2 decades into a war of extinction, and the bird people brought them a pretty wall hanger. Morozov scanned the crowd, and his gaze settled on Colt. The corner of the general's mouth twitched.
Master Sergeant Colt, he called out. Step forward.
Colt's stomach tightened. He moved, his boots clicking on the polished deck.
The Master Sergeant is our foremost combat engineer and weapons specialist,
Morozov explained to Lyran.
He and his subordinate, Corporal Jensen, will have the honor of testing and integrating this fine piece of technology into our arsenal.
Colt looked at the glowing rifle, then at the pristine alien. Lyran gave him a nod of serene encouragement. A dull ache throbbed behind Colt's eyes. The firing range was a brutalist cathedral of scorched armor plating and pockmarked targets. The Phase Lance sat on a testing cradle, looking profoundly out of place, a priceless violin in a scrapyard. Lyran and a younger, more severe-looking Signian with deep violet plumage observed via a stable holographic projection.
The weapon draws power directly from ambient energy,
explained Adept Thalia, the violet Signian. Her voice clipped.
Its core of layered, engineered emitters generates a contained microsingularity. The bolt is a pinpoint of warped spacetime. It is perfection.
Jensen was leaning over Colt's shoulder, her own tactical slate cinched to the diagnostic feed. Sergeant, the efficiency is off the charts. It's drawing less power than a standard issue flashlight, but the projected output is. Wow. Colt ignored them both. He ran his own diagnostic, checking each component twice. He checked the internal power cell that replaced a standard ammo feed, the alien energy cycling, the bizarrely ergonomic grip. It was light, too light. It felt hollow. He sighted down the range at a 20-centimeter slab of decommissioned battleship armor, the benchmark test for anti-material rifles. Firing, he announced, his voice flat. He squeezed the trigger. The weapon fired, making only a soft chime and remaining still in his hands. A needle-thin beam of white energy crossed the 100 meters in an instant. It struck the armor plate. A perfect, coin-sized hole appeared, its edges glowing cherry red. The only sound was the hiss of cooling metal from the target. Jensen broke the quiet first, the words spilling over each other. A contained space-time event. It bypasses melting. It unmakes. It erases matter from a distance. Do you know what this means for material science and energy projection? Colt remained silent. He stared at the neat little hole. It was a cauterized incision. He remembered the last Scourge Ravager he'd seen, a monster the size of a dropship. It had torn a Coalition frigate in half with a salvo of crude, oversized kinetic slugs. It created jagged, gaping wounds of twisted metal and frozen corpses. The hologram of Lyran resolved into focus, and the emissary stepped forward, his silver and gold plumage rippling. He looked like a painter admiring his masterpiece.
A pleasing demonstration,
Lyran said, his voice melodic. He turned his gaze to Colt.
Your assessment, Master Sergeant.
Colt powered down the weapon. He turned from the control panel to face the projection. He met the emissary's placid, ancient eyes. The thought of the men and women who died holding the line at Fob Dauntless, of the sheer, mindless numbers of the Scourge Swarm, of the frigate ripped open to the void. He gave the only assessment that mattered.
"It's a beautiful piece,"
Colt said, his expression a blank mask.
"Incredibly accurate, but..."
He paused, choosing his words with care.
"Got anything stronger?"
The hum of the range's ventilation system seemed to grow louder in the quiet. Jensen's jaw snapped shut. Behind him, he could hear General Morozov make a soft choking sound. On the holographic display, Lyran's magnificent plumage, once a serene river of silver and gold, stiffened and spread wide, the feathers catching the light like sharp shards of crimson glass. The emissary's face, placid moments before, tightened. Jensen brought a hand up to cover her face.
"Got anything stronger?"
General Morozov repeated, his voice a strained whisper. He was pacing back and forth in his office, a cramped, functional space that smelled faintly of stale coffee and the charged scent from an overworked air filter.
"Of all the undiplomatic, career-endingly stupid things you could have possibly said, you chose that."
Colt stood firm at parade rest in the center of the room.
"You told me to give a weapons assessment, sir. I gave one. The Phase Lance is a dueling pistol. We fight a war of attrition. The two approaches conflict." "I'm aware of the strategic situation, Master Sergeant,"
Morozov snapped, stopping to glare at him.
"Your job was to test the weapon and nod politely, to prevent a diplomatic incident that could sever ties with the only powerful ally we've made in this entire damned war. With respect, sir, if their entire arsenal is like that thing, they are a liability, a hindrance to our efforts."
Colt's voice was firm.
"A single Scourge heavy drone would shrug off a hit from that weapon."
Morozov sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. He sank into his chair, pressing the heels of his hands to his temples.
"You're right, Colt. That's the hell of it. Your assessment, for all its brutality and offense, was entirely correct."
Colt waited.
"High Emissary Lyran ended the transmission right after your comment,"
the general continued.
"I spent the next 3 hours in a back and forth with his aides. I was expecting them to recall their delegation and declare us persona non grata for the next millennium."
He looked up, an expression on his face Colt found baffling.
"Something else happened."
He tapped a few commands into his desk console. A file appeared on Colt's borrowed tactical slate.
"After his initial fury subsided, Lyran apparently became fascinated. He re-watched the log of your assessment a dozen times. He reviewed our public-facing combat footage of the Scourge. He spent a full shift in council with his top scientists."
Morozov leaned forward.
"It seems, Master Sergeant, that your bluntness provided him with a piece of data he was missing. Context. The Signians understand war as a concept, an abstraction. You just showed him what it looks like from the trenches."
Colt read the file. It was a formal proposal from the Signian Ascendancy, a joint research initiative.
"He has moved past giving us a weapon,"
Morozov said.
"He wants us to help him build one that meets their people's standards of scientific elegance and our more direct requirements. And he has specifically singled you out to lead the hands-on side of the project. He specifically requested you."
Colt scanned the document. On-site liaison. Sylvanus. Joint command structure. A cold feeling settled in his stomach, but with it came a flicker of something long dormant. Curiosity.
"He's also asked for Corporal Jensen,"
the general added.
"Citing her boundless theoretical enthusiasm, which I think means she talks fast." "Sir," Colt started. "This is an order, Master Sergeant. The Coalition has already agreed. The science teams back on Earth can run simulations all day. I need someone on the ground who can look at a blueprint and tell me if it'll hold up under fire. I need you to make sure whatever you build actually works."
Morozov leaned back, a grim smile on his face.
"You wanted something stronger, Colt? Go build it."
Colt looked down at the tactical slate. at the flowing Signian script next to the blocky Terran standard font. He thought of the pristine rifle and the endless swarm. He straightened up.
Yes, sir.
Last thing, Colt, Morozov said, his tone turning serious. This is new ground diplomatically. You'll have status, but you'll be on their turf, under their laws. Your only direct oversight is a priority channel to me. You will succeed.
I will, sir.
From orbit, Sylvanus resembled a painted sphere, continents swirled with emerald green and sapphire blue, patterns more art than geology. The landscape flowed with natural and constructed forms favoring curves and gentle slopes, a world meticulously cultivated for millennia, a planet-sized garden.
Look at that.
Zoe Jensen whispered, her face pressed against the shuttle's viewport.
The cities. They integrate into the landscapes. They use structures of grown biolumina to channel natural light. It's technology and nature woven together. It's beautiful.
Colt grunted from the seat next to her.
A soft target. My scans show a porous defense grid, sparse orbital platforms, and light sensor traffic.
He looked at the perfect world below and saw only a vulnerability.
It's a death trap.
Jensen shot him an annoyed look.
Try appreciating something for a moment on its own terms.
My job is to figure out how to blow things up so people like you can appreciate things,
he retorted, keeping his gaze on the descending view. Their shuttle landed on a platform that seemed to grow out of a towering spire of woven light. The air smelled clean, full of blooming flowers and fresh rain. Adept Thalia greeted them. Her violet plumage was a stark, severe contrast to the lush world around them. She moved with clipped, economical steps, her posture rigid.
Welcome to Sylvanus,
she said, her tone suggesting it was an inconvenience.
High Emissary Lyran is unavailable. I will escort you to your workspace. For security, you are confined to this spire. We call it the Forge.
Colt had pictured something like the workshops back home, cavernous spaces filled with heavy machinery, smelling of oil and hot metal. The Forge was something else entirely, a vast circular chamber with a domed, translucent ceiling that showed the sky above. The walls were smooth and white, the floor a polished black mirror of a floor. Consoles rose from the floor like minimalist sculptures, silent, sterile, and utterly pristine. It felt more like a laboratory or a museum than a place where you built things.
Impressive.
Jensen breathed, her gaze darting everywhere, taking in the alien technology. Colt did a slow turn, his boots echoing in the silence of the huge chamber.
Where are the tools?
He asked.
The heavy fabricators, the plasma cutters, the welders.
Thalia looked at him with genuine confusion. She gestured a slender three-fingered hand toward a small, intricate device on a pedestal. It hummed, emitting a focused beam of light.
We guide material structuring at the atomic level. We grow and ungrow rather than cutting or joining.
She said, weld, as if it were a profanity. A melodic voice interrupted the sterile air.
Adept Thalia, is that any way to welcome our esteemed guests?
High Emissary Lyran entered the chamber. His silver and gold plumage seemed to capture the light from the dome above. His earlier offense had vanished, replaced by a cool, analytical focus. He was studying them.
Master Sergeant Colt Corporal Jensen,
he said, lingering on Colt.
Welcome to the Forge. It is here that we shall attempt to find common ground between our philosophies.
He gestured around the pristine room.
Here we will create a weapon that possesses the elegance of Signian design and... What was your term, Sergeant? Ah, yes, the necessary capacity for overkill.
The first week produced only catastrophic failures. The cultural and engineering divide was less a chasm than a singularity. Colt's first instinct, born of 2 decades of frontline engineering, was to take what they had and make it more powerful.
Let's just overclock it,
he said, pointing at the schematics for the phase lance.
You mean push more energy through the focusing emitter than its design allows?
Thalia asked, her feathers ruffling. Exactly, Jensen chimed in. her stylus a blur as she sketched on her tactical slate. "We can bypass the regulators, create a temporary containment field to handle the backwash, and vent the excess heat. We could triple the output."
That is butchery, a corruption of engineering.
Thalia clicked her beak sharply.
The emitter array operates in a state of perfect equilibrium. To force that much energy through it would shatter the containment field.
I care about its output over its equilibrium,
Colt said flatly. They tried it anyway. They hooked up an auxiliary power source to a spare phase lance. When they activated it, the weapon made a high-pitched warbling sound that Thalia later described with a shudder as a surge of subatomic decay. Then the weapon's intricate core glowed white-hot and melted into a puddle of shimmering slag. Thalia looked as if they had just shattered a priceless artifact. Their next attempt was to go the other way. They tried to build a human-style containment system around a raw Signian power source. Signian energy tech relies on stable, phase-locked fields. Human tech relies on brute force magnetic confinement. Powerful and notoriously leaky. Jensen jury-rigged a magnetic bottle using Terran components shipped from the nearest outpost. The result, a monstrosity of thick cables, humming capacitors, and exposed conduit, looked like a tumor growing in the pristine lab. When they powered it up, the Signian energy core inside fought against the crude confinement field. The air filled with the chemical stench of burnt insulators, and the entire rig vibrated violently, threatening to tear itself apart.
Progress,
Colt declared, watching the power output readings spike erratically.
It is an offense to the laws of physics,
Thalia countered. Her violet plumage shot through the agitated streaks of red.
Your magnetic bottle is trying to contain a controlled chain reaction with brute force. It's an abomination.
That set Jensen off. Oh, I'm sorry, is our brute force method too ugly for you? Your tech is beautiful, I'll give you that, but it's fragile. It's a glass knife. A single piece of shrapnel hits that focusing emitter, and that equilibrium turns into a silent retreat.
Finesse is a strength, Corporal. It is the hallmark of mastery. Your approach is like using a sledgehammer to perform delicate metalwork.
Well, our patient is a 10-ton block of angry metal trying to kill us. We need a bigger hammer instead of a fine chisel. Colt stepped between them.
Enough!
His voice sliced through the argument. He looked from Jensen's flushed face to Thalia's ruffled feathers.
You're both right, which means you're both wrong. We're asking the wrong questions. We need to create something new, combining our methods. Something neither of us could build alone.
A few days later, Lyran found Colt staring out at the manicured gardens of Sylvanus from an observation deck. The emissary approached, his footfalls silent on the polished floor.
Your thoughts seem distant, Master Sergeant,
Lyran said, his voice soft.
Just thinking?
Colt replied, his back to the alien.
This place, it's quiet.
Quiet is the canvas upon which one paints thought,
Lyran offered, a typical Signian platitude. Colt turned to him.
In my experience, quiet happens right before a loud noise.
Lyran's feathers shifted in a gentle, questioning pattern.
We have a concept, Kel Shara. It roughly translates to the beauty of the single path. It is the belief that for every problem, there exists a single perfect solution. It is what drives our science, our art, our philosophy.
Colt grunted.
We have a saying in the Marines. 2 is 1 and 1 is none. It means you always have a backup for your backup. Redundancy. Elegance is the first thing to die in a firefight.
Lyran was quiet for a moment, processing. A path stitched onto the sleeve of Colt's work fatigues depicted a snarling, stylized feline creature.
That insignia is outside standard Terran Coalition issue.
It is?
Colt said. His gaze went distant for a moment.
It's from my old unit. Demolitions. We called ourselves the Hellcats.
An appropriate name, I imagine. What was your unit's specialization?
Colt's lips twisted into a grim smile.
Applied demolition.
The uncomprehending look on Lyran's face prompted a translation.
We blew things up.
He looked back out at a perfect, peaceful world.
You want to understand us, emissary?
You want to know why we build things the way we do? You need to understand the Scourge. They are a force of nature more than soldiers. Their existence is pure function, a force devoid of philosophy, of Kelshara. They are a fire, a mindless, self-replicating fire that wants to burn everything. And the only way you fight a fire that big is by starting a bigger one.
For the first time since they'd met, Colt saw something new in Lyron's ancient eyes. The emissary at last grasped the nature of the beast at his door. The breakthrough came, as it often did, from a moment of sheer frustration. Jensen hunched over a tactical slate, her stylus a blur as she sketched and deleted schematics. The wreckage of their experiments littered the lab. Melted components, overloaded capacitors, and several devices that had spontaneously disassembled themselves. 2 diagrams filled her screen. On the left, a schematic for a Terran Coalition Mark V spinal mass driver, a railgun, a brutal city-block-sized cannon that fired tungsten slugs the size of a shuttle at a fraction of the speed of light. On the right, the intricate energy array of a Cygnian prime energy core, power and finesse, ugliness and beauty. Colt walked up behind her, nursing a mug of brutally strong coffee. He looked over her shoulder at the 2 images. He pointed a grease-stained finger at the energy core, then moved it to the loading breech of the mass driver schematic.
What if,
he said, his voice a low rumble.
We just put that in there?
Jensen blinked, looking from the screen to Colt. Talia, who was meticulously aligning a sensor nearby, overheard and made a series of sharp clicking sounds.
That is illogical. You propose to use an instrument of immense and delicate power as crude ammunition, as a bullet.
More than a bullet, Colt clarified. As the warhead.
Talia scoffed, but Jensen's expression was changing. Her eyes, unfocused, then sharpened. Her stylus blurred across her tactical slate, pulling up new simulations, new equations.
Wait, she whispered. Wait a minute. That's an idea.
She looked at Talia, her eyes wide with a terrifying new concept.
You have to see it. The railgun is just the delivery system. Creating a stable, mobile containment field for that much raw energy is nearly unachievable. But the mass driver? It provides the kinetic energy, getting the core to the target through brute force alone.
Talia's feathers shifted in agitated, confused patterns.
But the containment field would fail under the acceleration forces. The core would rupture.
It will if we bring it to full power at the moment of impact.
Jensen was practically bouncing now.
We launch it cold. The railgun fires a shell, a big, armored shell. Inside is the core and a fast charge capacitor. We trigger the core to go critical just before impact. The containment field collapses catastrophically, releasing the core's entire energy potential in a single, uncontrolled burst. She turned to Colt, a wide, unsettling grin on her face. We'd be firing a controlled detonation power plant instead of a bolt of energy. A miniature, short-lived star. Talia stared at them, her plumage a chaotic muddle of violet and crimson. That is the most insane, reckless, and terrifyingly crude application of Cygnian science I have ever heard.
Colt took a long sip of his coffee.
So it's a good idea, then?
Jensen's grin widened.
It's our best idea.
The forge transformed from a pristine museum into a workshop floor. Massive cargo containers arrived from the Terran Coalition, dwarfing the elegant Cygnian spaceport. They held the components of a Mark V mass driver, colossal magnet rails, bus-sized capacitors, and thick, ugly slabs of armored plating. The Cygnian ground crews, used to moving delicate artistic installations, looked on in silent dismay as Colt directed heavy lift drones to haul the pieces into the forge. The sterile white chamber became a jumble of mismatched technology. Thick, greasy Terran power cables snaked across the floor, next to glowing Cygnian energy conduits. The once clean air now smelled of hot lubricants and scorched metal. Colt, stripped to a tank top, sweat-soaked and showered in sparks from a plasma welder, fused a mounting bracket into place. Jensen was a constant presence, coding on one screen while rerouting power to another. Talia, her shoulders perpetually tight, moved between them, calibrating the delicate energy fields of the Cygnian core, her careful movements a stark island of calm in the human chaos around her. Lyran visited one shift and found Colt fabricating a crude backup targeting system, a manual mess of wires, optical sensors, and a pair of large hand grips connected to a haptic feedback rig.
Master Sergeant,
Lyran inquired, his tone cautious.
the primary targeting system is accurate to within 1,000th of a millimeter at a range of a light second. Why are you building this?
Colt kept his eyes on his work.
2 is 1, and 1 is none, emissary. The fancy computer is Plan A. This is Plan B.
Lyran watched him for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. A flicker of something crossed his face. He was learning. He returned a few days later to a scene of even greater pandemonium. A massive component failed to seat in its housing. Talia and Jensen were in a heated debate about field resonance and material stress tolerances. Colt ended the discussion by picking up a ridiculously large wrench. He slammed it against the side of the component with a deafening clang. The piece slid into place with a satisfying thud. Talia's feathers fluffed out into a sphere of shock. Lyran glided to a halt beside Colt. He stared at the wrench, then at the now-seated component.
Is this,
he asked, his voice neutral,
a standard human engineering technique?
Colt wiped a smear of grease from his forehead with the back of his arm.
Yep,
He said deadpan.
we call it percussive maintenance.
Lyran turned and walked away, his expression that of a being reevaluating his entire understanding of the universe. The Sunbreaker cannon was a monstrous combination of brutalist human engineering and elegant Cygnian artistry. The long, thick rails of the mass driver formed its core, wrapped in an array of glowing Cygnian conduits. It was too big, too ugly, and too powerful to exist. They mounted the prototype on a remote orbital testing platform, a safe distance from anything important. Inside the platform's control room, every crew member focused on their console as Colt sat at the primary computer-assisted firing controls. Jensen and Talia sat side by side at the energy monitoring station, their previous arguments set aside in a shared, nervous focus.
Power core is stable,
Talia reported, her voice tight.
Containment field is nominal.
Capacitors are full, Jensen added, her usual excitement replaced with a grim intensity. We've loaded the shell, and we're ready, Sergeant. Colt looked at the main view screen. Their target, a captured inert Scourge Ravager Hulk, a mountain of dead, jagged metal, floated 10,000 kilometers away.
Firing at minimum capacity,
he announced. He keyed the sequence. A low, powerful thrum vibrated through the deck plating as the station's lights flickered, drawing on emergency power for a second. On the screen, a shimmering sphere of contained light erupted from the cannon's barrel. It was a marble of energy, a tiny caged star. It crossed the distance to the Scourge Hulk. It impacted. One moment, the kilometer-long behemoth of armor and weaponry was there. The next, only empty space remained. Its mass sublimated into constituent atoms. The sensors screamed, overloaded by an immeasurable energy release. A heavy quiet filled the control room. Talia stared at her console, her violet plumage drawn so tight against her frame she seemed to shrink. Colt's voice was low and practical.
Cannon works, but the power draw fused half the relays on this platform. The cannon is a one-shot weapon from this position.
He tapped a command, bringing up a schematic of the local orbit. He pointed.
For the next test, we'll move it to the primary defense station. Only that platform can feed this beast more than once.
Jensen leaned back in her chair, her eyes wide as she processed the weapon's power and the new logistical challenge. She let out a slow, shaky breath.
My God,
she whispered, her voice full of a terrible reverence.
What have we done?
High Emissary Lyran stood in the orrery, the command center of Sylvanas. Holographic displays of star systems floated around him like captured galaxies. For millennia, this room was a place of quiet contemplation, of charting stellar drift and philosophical currents. Now, it was a war room. A message blared from a priority channel. its icon a pulsing, urgent red. The message came from a deep space listening post on the edge of Cygnian territory, a place that had reported only passing comets for a millennium. Lyran accepted the connection. The face of the Cygnian adept on the screen was pale, his feathers a chaotic pattern of alarm.
High Emissary, a fleet has just translated from their transit dimension at the system's edge. They are Scourge.
The main display shifted, showing sensor telemetry. A tide of hostile icons bloomed on the display, their vectors a stark red against the system's placid blue. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Their energy signatures were jagged, chaotic, utterly alien to the Cygnians. But Lyran recognized the patterns. He had spent the last several weeks studying them.
A vanguard fleet,
He breathed.
They've broken through the Terran lines.
He opened a channel to the Terran Coalition High Command. General Morozov's weary face appeared. Lyran, we saw them punch through. A surprise vector we left uncovered. They're moving much faster than any previous swarm.
Can you intercept?
Lyran asked, despite the cold dread settling in his chest. Morozov's expression was grim. Negative. Our fleets are spread too thin holding the main front. They're in uncharted territory now, heading deep into your territory. We are unable to get a fleet to you in time. You're on your own.
But why here?
Lyran pressed.
Of all the empty systems in the void, why us?
They have no specific target, Emissary, Morozov said, his face etched with fatigue. They're following a predictable expansion vector along a stellar nursery rich in heavy elements. Your system is the first viable G-type star on that path. It was only a matter of time. We just thought we had more. The connection closed, leaving Lyran alone in the quiet of the orrery. He looked at the strategic display. The red tide of the Scourge fleet was moving on a direct course for the heart of the Ascendancy, for Sylvanas. He brought up his own defense forces, a handful of graceful silver ships designed for ceremonial patrols and diplomatic escort. They were floating sculptures, ill-suited as warships. His people were unready for war. Their millennia of peace had left them exquisitely vulnerable. He looked at the tidal wave of death approaching his home, and he knew that their only hope was the ugly, untested monster his human guests had just built in orbit. 10 hours. Colt's voice was flat, cutting through the silence in the orbital control room. That's our window. Lyran had just finished briefing them. The weight of the impending attack settled over them. The prototype is fused to this platform's frame, Jensen said, already pulling up schematics. We have to fire it again, and Colt said we'd need to move it to the main defense platform. Then we accelerate the timeline, Colt countered, his mind already in combat mode. He pointed at the larger structure on the local system map. Sylvanas' primary defense platform. It's the biggest power source in orbit. We're going to take our cannon, fly it over there, and bolt it to the side. Talia paled.
Unfeasible! The station systems are incompatible. It would take weeks to integrate.
We're hot-wiring it. Colt cut her off. We bypass their weapon control, their fire solutions, everything. We run a direct power line from their main reactor grid straight into our capacitors. It'll be crude and dangerous, but it'll work. Talia's feathers ruffled, her entire being radiating protest.
That is barbarism! A desecration of millennia of careful engineering.
She looked from Colt's determined face to the command display showing the approaching swarm. Her posture shifted from horrified to resolved.
But it is our only option.
Lyran stepped forward, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked at Colt, his formal title and rank forgotten.
Tell us what you need. You are in command.
The urgency of the crisis blasted away the cultural barriers. The next few hours were a blur of frantic, coordinated activity. Colt barked orders, his voice the clear authority in a room full of Cygnian scientists who outranked him in every way, but the one that mattered now: experience. Jensen and Talia worked in tandem, writing code on the fly to trick the defense platform's reactor into accepting a catastrophic power draw it was ill-equipped to handle. Colt directed the platform's engineering drones, using them for brute force construction far beyond their design. And in the middle of it all was High Emissary Lyran, Stripped of his formal robes, his silver and gold plumage smudged with grease, he hauled thick power cables alongside Signian engineers, his graceful movements now sharp and purposeful. He was a philosopher transformed into a soldier in a war he had just realized his people were losing for a long time. From the command center of the defense platform, Lyran watched the Scourge fleet arrive. The swarm appeared as thousands of black angular ships dropping out of their transit dimension, a horrifying tide. His small flotilla of defense ships, elegant silver slivers of light, moved to intercept.
All vessels engage at will,
Lyran ordered, his voice tight with tension. The Signian flotilla fired. Lances of pure, coherent light, the larger cousins of the phase lance, shot across the darkness. They struck a handful of Scourge drones, disabling them with pinpoint accuracy. The swarm responded. A wave of kinetic slugs, missiles, and plasma bolts washed over the Signian craft, tearing the elegant vessels apart. With their minimal shielding and delicate frames, they shattered into pieces, their dying reactors blooming like brief silent flowers in the dark. Lyran watched his people die, the swarm slaughtering his beautiful, ineffective ships. They bought time, minutes, with their lives. Every dying ship bought Colt's team a few more seconds. He stood, his face a mask of grief, finally understanding the price of peace in a galaxy that was anything but.
Power fluctuations! We're taking hits!
Jensen yelled over the groan of straining metal. The entire defense platform shuddered as another Scourge kinetic slug impacted its outer hull. The lights flickered. On her console, the energy flow to the Sunbreaker's core wavered dangerously.
Talia, I need to stabilize it. The primary conduits are failing,
Talia called back, her own console flashing red.
All paths are unstable.
Then we make one! Jensen's fingers flew, typing out a string of code she had designed months ago in a foxhole on Fob Dauntless. I'm creating a feedback shunt. It'll bypass the damage regulators and create a feedback loop directly from the main reactor.
That is the protocol you proposed,
Talia began, her eyes wide. The one Colt vetoed as too risky? Yeah, that's the one. Jensen slammed her palm on the activation key. The power reading stabilized, glowing a solid, angry green. It'll hold, probably. But if we take a direct hit on the main reactor now, this whole station vaporizes. Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. Sparks rained down from a ceiling conduit. Colt grunted in pain from across the room.
Power surge fried the targeting computer,
he yelled, ripping a useless headset off. He scrambled toward the manual rig he'd built, the crude assembly of grips and wires they'd bolted to the cannon's base.
I'm going blind. I'll have to aim it myself.
He strapped himself into the rig, his body now a physical part of the monstrous weapon. He looked through a simple armor-plated viewport. Jensen rerouted the last of the station's auxiliary power. Talia gave the containment field a final, desperate tweak. Colt gripped the controls, his knuckles white. He keyed his comm, opening a channel to Lyran in the command center.
The Sunbreaker is hot,
he grunted, the station vibrating around him.
Give me a target.
Lyran stood before the main command display. The remnants of his defense flotilla had been annihilated. The Scourge swarm was closing in, a relentless tide preparing to wash over his world. But in the center of the swarm, one icon glowed larger than the rest, brighter, a nexus, a massive command ship that pulsed with data, coordinating the attack.
Their command node,
Lyran whispered. He pressed his hand to the comm panel. His voice came back strained but clear.
There, break their mind, erase them.
Colt heard the command. The target appeared in his viewport, a distant, ugly blot against the stars. He took a breath. He relied on 2 decades of combat, of leading shots, of instinct. He lined up the shot. He squeezed the trigger. The entire station groaned, a colossal beast in agony as it shunted a catastrophic amount of power into the cannon. The lights died, plunging the firing room into darkness, lit only by the emergency strobes and the blinding light erupting from the Sunbreaker. A sphere of plasma, a miniature sun, bloomed at the end of the barrel. It launched forward, silent and terrible, across the void. It moved with a slow, implacable purpose. It hit the center of the Scourge fleet. A colossal light bloomed in the void. Where the command node once was, a new star expanded, its wave of energy instantly vaporizing the command node and dozens of ships around it. The blast's force crippled hundreds more, their systems fried, their hulls flash melted. Across the battlefield, the Scourge swarm, its central intelligence erased, faltered. The coordinated assault crumbled into confusion. Individual drones fired aimlessly or stopped, awaiting orders that were now silenced forever. They were just pieces. The light faded. The quiet that followed was deeper than the noise that had preceded it. They had broken the Scourge attack. The immediate threat was over. On the firing deck of the station, Colt unstrapped himself from the manual rig, his muscles screaming in protest. The emergency lights cast long shadows in the smoke-filled room. He looked over at Jensen. She slumped in her chair, a wild, exhausted laugh escaping her lips. He glanced at Talia. The Cygnian scientist was staring at the sensor readings from the blast, her face a mixture of terror and reverence. They had done the unachievable. Lyron's voice, thick with an unfamiliar emotion, came over the comm. The formal titles, the eloquent phrasing, all of it gone.
Terry and Colt,
he said.
Thank you.
Colt was too tired to form a proper reply. He just raised a hand and gave a slight nod. For the first time in years, staring out at the wreckage of the enemy fleet, the oppressive weight of the war lifted just for a moment. Not victory, not yet, but it was a flicker of something he had long forgotten: hope. The ruling council of the Cygnian Ascendancy filled the grand orrery. Colt and Jensen stood in the center, wearing freshly cleaned uniforms, standing stiffly as Lyron bestowed upon them the sun crest of Sylvanas, his people's highest honor. They accepted the glowing medallions with mumbled thanks. When the ceremony was over, Lyron addressed his people. His voice was once again the melodic instrument of a statesman, but now a new core of steel laced his melodic tone.
For millennia, we pursued the art of defense as a philosophy,
he declared, his gaze moving around the council.
We have learned a brutal lesson. Philosophy fails to stop a swarm. Today, that changes.
He turned his gaze to Colt and Jensen.
The Cygnian Ascendancy's isolation ends today. We will become a forge world of the Terran Coalition, a full partner in this war. We will dedicate our science, our knowledge, our resources to victory. In return, we will learn the lessons of survival that our human allies have paid for in blood.
He raised his hand. The main display behind him lit up with the schematics of their monstrous creation.
We will begin the Sunbreaker program. We will build more, and we will build them bigger.
A murmur went through the council, a mix of shock and dawning resolve. Colt looked at Jensen. The combat engineer and the brilliant corporal had moved from the sidelines to the heart of the war. They were now at the center of the single most important weapons development project in the galaxy. Their own insane idea had just commandeered their lives. Jensen caught his eye. Her expression was a mirror of his own, a mix of terror and exhilaration. Many battles remained to fight, but for the first time, they could see a path to the end, and the fire of new suns would light it.